All right, welcome everyone to the Reading League California. We are excited tonight to host for the first time a secondary event about secondary literacy. We've been wanting to do this for a while, and we are super excited to have a great panel discussion here tonight. I'm going to hit forward on this. Our California Reading League mission is to promote the awareness and understanding of evidence-aligned literacy instructional practices and curriculum in California based on the science of reading. So what you see down in the corner is a little QR code to join us. That'll come up again at the end, so no worries there. We want you to know that when you join the Reading League California as a member, the membership dues help us provide free content and helps us get out in the state at various conferences and grow our membership. We have 3 levels of membership. You can join for free, you can join as a paid member, and we even have a discount for pre-service and retired teachers. So if you haven't joined yet, be sure to join, and that way you'll get all the information about these great events that we have. We are excited. Secondary students need the science of reading too. I am really grateful to Jody from Reading Horizons for setting this up. You are going to have a great panel tonight, and we are excited to host them. We have several speakers that'll go through some various aspects of secondary literacy, and we've had over 300 registrants tonight, so I can definitely see a part 2 in our future. These are our objectives for tonight. We're going to talk about the science of reading and structured literacy with secondary folks. We're going to talk about the impact of literacy struggles on older students and their self-perception and their emotional well-being. We'll talk about some specific learning disabilities. We'll talk about the role of counseling, and we'll emphasize how literacy impacts career and educational opportunities, as well as the social justice aspect. Here is our agenda, and in about 2 seconds, I'm going to turn it over to Jody, but this is kind of how we're going to flow. We're going to listen to some content, and then we're going to stop and have a Q&A, and then we're going to have a little more content, and then a little more Q&A, and then a little more content, and then we'll save time at the end to hopefully get as many questions answered as we can in the time allowed. We did extend, we normally just do an hour event, so we're going a little bit longer tonight so we have time to get all of these fantastic questions answered. All right, I'm going to stop share for a sec and welcome Jody Kammer from Reading Horizons. Hey, Jody, how are you?
I'm doing really well, Kristen. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody that is joining us tonight. We so appreciate you taking the time off of a very busy holiday to come here and spend this hour and a half with us talking about this really critical issue, which is how do we provide effective secondary literacy instruction to our students? Personally, my background is primarily as a secondary ELA instructor in the special education setting. I also spent some time working as a reading specialist in a K-6 classroom. So this is a subject that's very near and dear to my heart. And we have tried to gather some of the top experts in the state of California to spend time with you this evening. And that is the amazing Chrissy Cotton and Jody Amaditz. And so to begin the session this evening, Chrissy's going to kick some things off for us. And so I just want to introduce her. If you are not familiar with her, I've seen her speak at multiple events, and I was just so blown away by the content she was able to provide. She's the senior program manager at the Napa County Office of Ed, and in her role, she collaborates with districts to support leaders and educators in how they can better implement effective literacy practices for all students, including our older students, those middle school and those high school students. She's worked as a classroom teacher, she's worked as a district instructional coach, and now she is with the Napa County Office of Education. So I'm so excited to be a part of her presentation and learn from her this evening. I always gain something every time I'm in a conference with her and I'm able to listen to her speak. So I'm going to hand it over to Chrissy. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jody. No pressure here. But let me get my screen shared so that you guys can see what we are working on. Oh, all right. Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate you all taking the time out of your Wednesday evening to be here and having this opportunity to share with you the work that we've been doing in Napa County and across the state of California with our literacy grant, Lead to Literacy. So, Lead to Literacy is one of the 7 priority areas in the comprehensive literacy state development grant that is from California Department of Education. And our priority area focuses on supporting the literacy needs of secondary students with disabilities, including dyslexia. And our vision is really to empower futures through literacy. And our work emphasizes the need to create equitable systems so that every learner can thrive. There we go. And so when we take a look at state level data here in California, we recognize an urgency to partner with secondary schools to explore potential changes that are necessary to support all students in improving their literacy outcomes and ensuring that they're successful in their futures. So Lead to Literacy is currently partnering with with schools in 3 different counties in California: Napa, Riverside, and Siskiyou County. And so our schools reflect diverse environments, context, and sizes. We have large schools, we have small schools, we have urban schools, we have rural schools, we have traditional schools, and then we also have a few alternative programs, including our court and community school here in Napa County. So at the beginning of this Lead to Literacy journey that started 3 years ago, we had to first acknowledge the challenge facing our secondary schools. And so we crafted a question to really help guide us in this work. We knew it wasn't going to be easy since the secondary schools have unique needs and systems that must be considered. And these systems include master schedules, curriculum, teacher knowledge, student motivation, graduation requirements, which is a huge one, and of course, time. So all of those things we had to make sure we were considering in our work. So in addition to looking at systems and building capacity, we also had to think about the mindsets and beliefs of our educators as well as our students. And so weaved into all of our work was really making sure that we focused on the why of this work and the fact that teaching reading is a necessary part of secondary school programming. And educators need to recognize the fact that for some of our students, they still need that direct and explicit instruction in word recognition. And so teaching reading is essential for many of our students that are in our classrooms every day. So how did we approach the work with our sites? So it didn't just include instruction, but really we wanted to ensure that each site, what we call the literacy ecosystem, which are the essential elements that are necessary for progress and growth, was being attended to with intention. So I'm going to share some specific examples of what our sites did to attend to these elements, and we call these the 6 C's. The first element in our ecosystem is clarity. Clarity is all about ensuring that everyone from the district office down to the classroom is clear on the needs of the system and what steps are going to be taken to achieve their literacy goals. And because we cannot expect change without a plan, we really spent time before we jumped into professional learning and implementation of materials or curriculum. We had our sites work on establish literacy teams and work on a plan. We knew that we could not approach this work with a one size fits all. strategy. So the teams really collaboratively came together to review their data, determine the needs of their students, develop a plan that focused on specific practices that would work for their context. So I think one of our big learnings around this work at secondary is you have to make it your own, and you have to look at what your students need and what's going to work for your context. So once our teams established a plan, then that's when we got into the professional learning and building some understanding around structured literacy. And we really wanted to make sure that there was a shared understanding about what instruction looked like for older students, or what it could look like for older students. And, as secondary educators, we don't always have the knowledge or skills to support students struggling to read in middle school and high school. So we made sure that in our professional learning, we included administrators, classroom teachers, we have paraeducators involved, as well as support providers. We included speech and language folks. We included school psychologists because we really wanted to make sure everyone had a common learning experience. And what really this allowed to happen as well is because all of our work and learning was grounded in the science of reading. We focused on the simple view of reading as well as Scarborough's reading rope. All of our counties were able to create common language and understanding regarding reading instruction and assessment. So they were able to talk to each other and share strategies and practices and resources, and everyone understood the why, or kind of how it would support students. So the next C was all about community. And Lead to Literacy, we worked closely with our county office partners, but we also relied heavily on some external partnerships. So Chartwell Teaching Institute, you'll hear from Jody this after my spiel, but Jody and Chartwell was an integral part of the work in providing some training for all of our teachers. We also had Dr. Solis from UC Riverside. He worked with some of our coaches to revisit kind of what implementation could look like, that ongoing learning piece. But we also worked together to gather input from other partners, connect resources, and really customize the work so that through those ongoing conversations about implementation and meeting those goals. As a community, we also worked together to develop some tools. So one of our tools on the left-hand side was a structured literacy tool. Like Jody from Chartwell is involved with this, our coaches, our sites. But it was a tool that we developed so that everyone was clear around like, well, what are the principles of structured literacy? What do we mean when we say structured literacy? And then sites could use that throughout the year to engage in more learning, more focused professional learning opportunities. And so that was one thing that came out of the work. But another piece was we had some collaboratives. So we knew that participating in several days of professional learning was never enough. So the county offices offered monthly collaboratives for all of our educators to really continue the learning, but also go deeper with some of the strategies and routines. And the best part of it was that they were able to share and collaborate and network with one another and talk about what was working for them. And so they learned from each other. Um, so we had that as a way to, we now have teachers across the state talking to each other on a regular basis. So. Nope, it's not going. What happened to my clicker? Go over here. There we go. You'd think you have Zoom down after what, 4 years of it? All right. So next, collaboration. So fostering collaboration is another element in our literacy ecosystem. And For most secondary teachers, we're very fortunate to have time built into our schedule for some collaboration. However, some of our sites needed to rethink how that time was being utilized. So using that time intentionally so that educators could come together and share successes, problem solve barriers, plan instruction, and review data. And for some of our sites, it meant finding time for the special education and the general education teacher to meet and really talk about the literacy outcomes and the work happening for students. So one big learning for our educators, and I think this is a need in our secondary schools, is that our universal screeners are not providing enough information about the specific literacy skills of our struggling students or the instructional support needed. And so our teams came together because they knew that our teachers need the right data so they aren't missing kids. We need to make sure that kids are visible so that the system can adjust. And so, with our coaches, with our county offices, our teams started to look at options and different types of diagnostic assessments available around phonics, but also comprehension, fluency, and spelling. This led to the next piece. There we go. So after we've done some professional learning, they started to look at assessments. We realized that there wasn't necessarily clarity around um, when are we using which assessment? What do we do with that data? What happens? So our sites developed a process map or a flow chart. Um, but we wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of the assessments being available. And then what do we do with that data, right? What are those instructional decisions? And so the process maps detail which diagnostic assessments would be utilized and then determine like what the next steps would be instructionally, right? And so our teams really started to use their time to discuss the learning needs of their students and determine those effective evidence-based practices. There we go. All right. So the next culture. Culture is all about flexibility when your clicker's not working, and recognizing the unique needs of a district and site. And like I mentioned before, we really knew going into this that it was not a one size fit all approach. We also knew that just because we were the leads of the grant, we did not have the answers, right? We were really going in to be collaborators and partners through this work. And so once our sites experienced some shared learning through our partnership with Chartwell, and they were able to start assessing the learning needs of their students, each of our schools made some decisions about their schedules and programs that worked best for them. And so some of our sites implemented a zero period. And the amazing thing was, even though it was a middle school, the kids showed up. The kids were there, and the parents drove them to school early because they saw the value in it. And so that's been a success for one of our schools. A couple of our other schools were able to dedicate a period in the master schedule for structured literacy. RTI time, MTSS time worked for another one of the sites. And another site used a rotation model, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about in the next couple of slides. But it really was about what was going to be the best fit for each site. And so from there, our sites started to consider the materials that would best meet the literacy needs of their students. And again, county offices, along with the coaches and teams, work together to make some recommendations and decisions. But some of our sites um, are using materials that are focused on the word recognition strands of the reading rope. So materials like Spire or Sonde. Um, Others are using some resources that are focused on multisyllabic words and morphology. And others are using some resources around fluency. And others are, it's a combination, right? So again, it wasn't like, here's some materials, go forth. It was really using the data and the learner needs to make some decisions. Another way that we tried to attend to culture and the unique needs of our secondary students was to make sure that the materials were age appropriate. And so one of our coaches worked on creating sound spelling cards that included relevant, relatable topics for older students, which I thought was cool. Um, and then the last two C's are coaching and continuous improvement. So we had coaches that really partnered with our sites and our teachers, and they were able to follow up after trainings and customize the needs of their teachers. And all of our sites are engaged in this continuous improvement process. They're never done. They're still looking at ways to improve and make changes to the work. So it talked about rotations earlier. So this is an example that with our coaches partnered with some of their teachers, they put in a rotation model. And so the general education teacher was taking students and working on morphology and multisyllabic word reading. The special education resource teacher was working with a group of students on foundational skills. The para-educators were working with students based off of data. And then there was practice activities as well. So not only was the site using small group instruction to support and provide targeted instruction, but the teachers were working collaboratively together so that they could meet the needs of all the students. And so, although our work is not done, we're starting to see some positive outcomes at our district, school, and classroom level. So, board policy that's allowing structured literacy classes to count towards graduation, huge win. We're also starting to see improved IEP goals because our teachers understand how to identify the needs of their students. And the confidence of our students and teachers is just increasing. So I want to wrap it up by sharing just a few quotes from our teachers and our students that are out there in the classrooms. Um, so I like to read more. I open up and read more books. Also helps my speaking skills. It just has helped me overall. Structured literacy is my favorite time of the day. I wish I could teach reading all day, every day. Working with small groups for Sonde intervention is empowering for the student and myself. Instead of seeing letter by letter, there are words and sentences now. I can pretty much read anything, and I love this part. And if I can't, I know how to figure it out. And then this is helping me get better at reading so that I'm ready when I get to high school. I want to go to college, so I need this because they know it. They know that they need this. They need the teachers to give them the skills and the strategies. Um, so that's Lead to Literacy in a nutshell and some of the work that we've been doing. So if you're interested, want more information, my contact information around along with my colleagues in Riverside and Siskiyou County. We'd love to share. We also would love to highlight if you'd ever like to see any of the classrooms and some of the work that's been going on. We would love to brag about our schools. But just to conclude and kind of segue into Jody, our sites could have changed schedules and just provided materials. But I think what we've learned is an essential piece of this work and this ongoing work is really around building the knowledge and confidence of our educators. And we really weren't able to do this without our partnership with Chartwell Teaching Institute. So I'm going to pass it over to Jody so that she can share more about the work that they're doing.
And before Jody begins, I just want to take a second and introduce her. For those of you who maybe are not familiar with the work of Chartwell School, they were not on my radar a few years ago and have in the recent past here become just a huge influence in how I'm looking at literacy and how I'm thinking about supporting the older learners that I'm working with and the educators that I'm working with who are supporting older learners. So Jody is currently the director of teaching and learning at Chartwell School, and she has a master's degree as a reading specialist from Columbia University Teachers College. She's taught as a learning specialist in New York City. She is also an ELA and reading specialist. She's worked at Westchester Public Middle School. On top of all of these accolades, she's also certified as an Orton Gillingham classroom educator. So she is an OG and she's trained in multiple structured literacy programs. She's also working right now as a coordinator with Chartwell's UCSF Dyslexia Center phenotyping partnership. And so she's supporting the early reading screener team at UCSF, and that is referred to as Multitude. So that's going to have a huge impact on our California educators once they're finished with that work. She's also the co-director of Chartwell's Teacher Training Institute, and she's accredited by the International Dyslexia Association. So she is somebody who can come in, she can watch teachers, she can give feedback, provide that immediate coaching that is so valuable. And she partners with schools and districts to provide workshops in the science of reading. She trains teachers to develop their literacy programs and practices. There's not much Jody can't do. So let me go ahead and turn it over to her so we can all learn from her expertise.
Thank you, Jody. Thank you, Christy. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. You can hear me okay? Okay. I'm going to share my screen here. And that mode. Oh, no. Hold on. There we go. Okay. So everyone can see my screen, yes? Okay, wonderful. Okay, welcome. So yes, I had the honor of working with Lead to Literacy for 3 years. And some of the work that we did is we had teachers come to Chartwell School in Seaside, and they were all secondary educators. And we did a week-long course, a 5-day course in the science of reading. And it was all overview of the science of reading. And then we got into the practical approach of how do we teach general education and special education secondary students, 6th grade through 12th grade. And we refined that work over the 3 years and developed the tool. And just want to say that the approach is we call it a program agnostic approach. There was no specific program that we taught, but we did introduce programs that the teachers could utilize and resources in the classroom. And depending on the group, the teacher, whether it was a special education teacher, a high school English teacher, depending on the setting, and we adapted and we provided resources. So this is definitely ongoing work that can be adapted. Okay. So I'm going to, before I go into that even, I want to say that 5-day course is a 5-day intensive course. What I'm going to present tonight is 15 minutes. So I kind of would like to think of it as maybe the 2-minute trailer to a 3-hour movie. I'm going to just provide some snippets of information that I think you might find interesting and useful, and know that there's more out there. And again, you can reach out to me at any time if you want more information. I also want to share, as I think I saw Nancy Redding on this call, and she was the Orton Gillingham fellow who trained me. So Nancy's out there too. Okay. So I start with dyslexia because, first of all, there are 1 in 5 students in general education classrooms sitting in classrooms who struggle with reading, and I feel like in all the teachers that I've worked with over the course of the last 8 years, they think they might have had one dyslexic student once or something like that. Not everyone, but I've heard that. So we have to really understand that there are so many struggling readers in our classrooms, students with dyslexia, but also students who are 2, 3 years behind. And I want to talk a little bit about why I think that's happening and has happened. But I want to start here on the right side of this uppermost top corner of the chart. 15 to 20% of the population has dyslexia or a learning difference. And so it is just so important for people to, as educators, to learn more about dyslexia and its impact on student learners, social emotional impact, and on academic. So also, I do feel like this is common knowledge at this point, which makes me very happy that dyslexia does not equal low intelligence. It is a unique brain organization with its own strengths and challenges, and I'll talk a little bit more about that tonight as well. And then down here, students with dyslexia can learn to read. And so if they do learn to read, they still have dyslexia, the way that their brain is wired is such. Again, I'll talk more about that. And it's also interesting to know that dyslexia is hereditary. And so there's about a 50% chance if a parent has dyslexia that the child will as well. So those are just some quick facts. So what is dyslexia? I like to just ground us there first. This is the definition from the California guidelines for dyslexia. It is a specific learning disability. So in public schools, sometimes we would refer to that as an SLD in reading, and it is neurobiological in origin. It's characterized by difficulties with accurate and or fluent word recognition and poor spelling and decoding abilities. When I worked with a co-taught in a general education public middle school, my English teacher did not know that spelling also had to do with dyslexia. I thought it was only reading. So the more we learn, the better. It is a deficit in the phonological component of language, and that is often unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities and the provision of effective classroom instruction. So people with dyslexia need to learn to read in a very specific way. In the training, we go much more into what is a phonological component, but it is isolating the sounds. You might have heard of phonological awareness. This is all taught in kindergarten, first grade, and can be continued on, especially with struggling readers. The secondary consequences, which I think are powerful for secondary educators, is that it may include problems in reading comprehension due to reduced reading experience that can impede growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. So, and this is again in another slide, good readers like to read, they read more. Students who struggle to read early on don't read a lot, and therefore that impacts their reading comprehension and vocabulary development. Okay, so Chrissy showed you the rope. If you've been to any reading conference there exists in the world, you've seen this rope before, but I put it up here because I want us to, again, look at this in terms of dyslexia. If we think of the bottom of the rope, word recognition, this is often where people with dyslexia really struggle with this phonological awareness, this hearing the sounds and being able to isolate the sound segment and blend sounds and syllables in language, and then the decoding, sounding out words, and then in orthographic mapping, which is mapping words into your sight word vocabulary. Where people with dyslexia can also have difficulty is in language comprehension, the top of the rope, but often people with dyslexia have very strong language skills, expressive language, receptive language abilities, and so sometimes they can be kind of get by along the way with these strong abilities, fly under the radar. Again, this is another image that I hope that many of you have seen before, and it's shown very often at reading conferences. So the people with dyslexia are down here at the bottom. But I share this again to sort of orient ourselves to what we're thinking about when we're thinking about secondary learners. We're thinking about students who didn't learn the foundational skills early on. So when they were originally taught to read in elementary school, they may not have had a structured literacy approach. So they may have had a little bit of phonics at kindergarten, maybe first grade, and then probably not a whole lot afterwards. So maybe they were getting by, or they learned to memorize words and then they were getting by. But then once they get to those multisyllabic words, they never had any strategies. So if you're a general education secondary teacher, you've probably noticed that students are not able to sound out new words that you present to them, like photosynthesis or revolutionary. They don't have the strategies to sound out that word. And so they're asking you. So that's grounded in how they were taught to read in California. So when we think about readers, and again, I'm just going to go through this quickly in case you haven't seen it, but about 5 to 10% of readers learn to read very easily, maybe just from listening to books when they're little, looking along, maybe at their mother, father, looking at the book. They're picking it up very easily. And then about 35 to 40% of students can learn to read relatively easily with broad instruction, no matter what the instruction is. But there's a good 40 to 45% of learners, which is almost half of our learners, that need direct, explicit, in ongoing phonics instruction, especially for spelling and decoding multisyllabic words. And many students in your classes did not receive this type of instruction early on, so they're struggling now. And so now that a lot of curricula have revised their programs to incorporate more systematic phonics, it didn't exist up until this point in many curricula. So therefore, you have so many learners in your room that still need these strategies and these skills. And there are ways that you can implement this in special education, in tier 2, and in your general education classes. So this is the work that we did with Lead to Literacy, is how can we incorporate this into instruction for secondary learners? So many, maybe half of which need it across California. Next. This is a very comprehensive slide, but I like to leave this in just down at the bottom here where it says early reading instruction that builds neural pathways is essential. And 56% of variance in reading outcomes is accounted for by the change in volume in white matter between kindergarten and 3rd grade. Early intervention is so important. And if it doesn't happen, if it's not available, then those students are going to struggle throughout their education. And so that is, again, why so many students need instruction now in secondary classrooms. And I know that that's possible because I taught middle school for very long and helped intervene. I like to leave this up in all of my slide presentations as well. It's called the Matthew effect. It's what I said before. There might be a gap early on in 1st grade when students are learning to read quickly and some are not. And then what happens is those students who love to read and read well read more and more and more. And those who don't read, and that gap widens. It's called the Matthew effect because it comes from the Bible, where the rich get richer. That's why it was coined by Stanovich in 1986. So the good readers get richer in their language development, in their comprehension, in their vocabulary, while the poor readers only have access to language through speaking, unless they're listening to audiobooks, which is amazing. Okay. Again, these are just the little snippet highlights. In my course and in some of my workshops, I really go into the cognitive processes involved in reading, because we think of sounding out words maybe, or memorizing words maybe, and that would be the phonological processing and orthographic processing and the sound symbol correspondence. So that would be attaching the sound to the letter. So I would look at this and say S says, and being able to access that. But actually, there are many more cognitive processes involved in reading that we don't even think about. And they're important for educators, all educators, to know, because they impact not just reading, but all of education. Often people with dyslexia have weaker rapid automatic naming. That's why this test is in many of the kindergartner screeners that are coming out, to test their ability to retrieve information quickly, which is the ability to quickly retrieve the access the sound and be able to access it quickly is a retrieval ability. So it also comes into play with other things like retrieving information, retrieving words. Working memory is another component of dyslexia. So once you know all the sounds and you can retrieve them, you have to be able to hold them all in your working memory to blend them. So if I think about this, have to hold all those sounds and blend them. Working memory assessments show that people with dyslexia often, not always, have difficulties with working memory. This has to do with any kind of holding information in a classroom. Take out your notebook, turn to page 5. We're going to read the first paragraph, and then we're going to answer the questions. We're going to start with paragraph 7, and then you ask someone with dyslexia in the class, what are we doing? They've lost it. They were listening to you, but they couldn't hold it all in their working memory. Other students with attention difficulties sometimes struggle in this area as well. People with dyslexia have difficulty with sequential processing. Also really important for teachers to know. Timeline. And then also executive functioning is also correlated. So again, we go into learning more about this and then how you can support students in classrooms who struggle in these areas. So I'd like to say it's not just a reading difficulty, it has to do with processing. Characteristics of dyslexia. Again, this is directly from the California dyslexia guidelines that you can access for free online. And I pulled the information about secondary students and what that looks like. So dyslexia exists on a continuum. There are people who are very impacted, it's very severe, and there are people who are mildly struggling in these areas. So some presentation in secondary students, they have difficulty decoding multisyllabic words and reading fluency. So if you ever have students read aloud in your class, you will notice this right away. They can have difficulty with reading comprehension, often because they're struggling still with the reading fluency or decoding. Their focus, their capacity is on the decoding and they don't have room for comprehension. Or it could be because they had that limited experience reading. Spelling strategies are very difficult. Avoidance of reading for pleasure, very difficult. I like to say these are the things that are somewhat obvious that you would think about with someone with dyslexia. The next slide is some other things that you might not think about as a teacher of students with dyslexia. They often do have poor performance on written tests, not just because of spelling, and more even for organization, could be because of spelling, accessing information for writing, and also timed tests. Again, it's that rapid retrieval of information that might make it difficult. Word recall and recalling facts is difficult. Learning a foreign language, word problems in mathematics computation because of that sequential processing and working memory, written composition, organizing ideas, planning, organizing, managing time and materials, and note-taking can all be difficult. So we don't always think about these. When we think about accommodations for people with dyslexia, we think about am I going to read it to them, right? But there are so many areas that can be impacted in learning. Okay, people with dyslexia also have mind strengths. So many mind strengths. The way that their brains are wired, often, and again, this is every individual is different, but I have worked with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kids with dyslexia, and so many of them present with these strengths. They often have spatial thinking strengths, visual thinking, navigation abilities, building, STEAM, makerspace, Lego, take things apart, put it together, all strengths. They can often be storytellers, creative mind, what's the word I'm thinking of? Just great imaginations, interconnected thinking. They see we say they see the forest, they don't see the trees. It's big picture thinking and connecting ideas, and dynamic, goal-directed future prediction, risk takers. And so it's so important to also know these strengths, visual thinking, so that you can utilize these strengths in the classroom as much as possible. Okay, accommodations and equitable instruction. By making yourself aware of the strengths and difficulties of people with dyslexia, you can refine your instruction through universal design for learning. And when you do that, you make learning more equitable and better for everyone in your classroom. So utilize those strengths whenever possible. Pair all the modalities, visual, tactile, manipulatives with verbal presentation. Provide graphic organizers to develop ideas for writing. Support their management of time by having structure to your classes. Always give explicit instruction. give time, extended time for reading material, especially dense material, access to audiobooks. Again, these are just snippets. Direct instruction in multiple formats, previewing vocabulary. These are just some key strategies, and I would definitely love to share this with all of you afterwards so you can refer back to it. I know we're going through it pretty quickly. I just have problems tearing things down. Okay, next. So this is going to, but the direct, so these are ways that you can accommodate in the classroom, but they also need direct reading instruction. So what does that look like? Well, it depends, right? And this is the part of the beauty of the training is let's look at all the different learners and talk about how can we instruct in different settings, different environments. So I like to kind of break it down into tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. So if we look at MTSS, we know that universal supports core instruction, tier 1, tier 2, targeted intervention, and tier 3, intensive services. So the type of intervention is going to look different across these tiers for sure. And the fun is working with different schools to think about how can we structure, just like Christy was talking about, maybe an early period, maybe finding other time in the day, maybe instruction in the general education classroom, maybe teachers switch students, maybe it's rotations where you're working with different students on different things at different times. And it's really fun to plan this with teachers. So when we think about instruction, we're thinking about, okay, where can I have this systematic phonics instruction? Well, that, again, I said it's going to look different across the tiers. Mostly that's going to need to happen in a tier 3 setting because if you have direct instruction, I'm going to show this in a later slide, it needs to be targeted for students exactly at their level and move at their pacing. But there are programs that I'll show you that are good for all students to learn. So I'll show you that on some next slides. We want to think about morphology. All students need more work with morphology, Latin, Greek roots. This somehow disappeared from education for a while, and we need to bring it back. This is so supportive of vocabulary development for everyone. I absolutely think that this work can be done in tier 1 instruction. High frequency words, again, an area that might be more for a tier 3 type instruction, and reading fluency. Again, this could be taught and worked on throughout the tiers. So we'll talk about that. I just wanted to define structured literacy. I love this graphic. Structured literacy is a systematic and cumulative instruction. So it is a scope of skills that you're teaching, phonics skills, maybe morphology skills, vocabulary, and it leads into reading comprehension. And you have a plan in place and you're moving systematically through that plan, and it's cumulative, it builds on itself. The teaching is always direct and explicit. You're building on and teaching exactly what the students need to know, and it's diagnostic. You're constantly assessing what your students need and moving forward with a plan. It incorporates phonology, sound symbol relationships, syllables, which all middle school students need, morphology through high school for sure, syntax same, and semantics. Incorporates all of these areas. Okay, so my last slides are really to show you that some of these programs would be more for tier 2 and 3 reading intervention. And I believe that Chrissy might have mentioned SPIRE. So this would be done with small groups of students in this tier 2 or 3 type of reading. It's a program that's very systematic. The teacher can learn it and deliver this type of instruction. This would not be something for the general education teacher to teach. Wilson, another program that's developed for secondary learners. It was originally created for 4th and above. All of the vocabulary is for secondary learners. It's sophisticated. There's no baby pictures, young student pictures. There's passages that are developed that are of higher interest to older students. And then there's same thing for Elevate from Reading Horizons. They teach them, you'll see here, I love this image to show you that they're learning a code to divide multisyllabic words. That's what the students need, is they need a system. They see a word they've never seen before and they have no word attack strategies. They need attack strategies to be able to decode multisyllabic words at the secondary level. And many, many students in general education classes could use that too. Here are some types of activities that you would do by breaking words into syllables. These are some prefixes and suffixes. This is just what some of that work looks like at the secondary level. Admonish. This doesn't look like first grade phonics, right? Programmatic, inhibit, consensus, kinesthetic, extrinsic, right? Could your students in your classes read these words? Probably not many of them, right? So when we think of phonics, we think of like ABCs or something, but this is really can be very sophisticated. What do I have over here behind you? In syllables, cosmetic, extrinsic, indignant, non-toxic, right? They can learn vocabulary and they can learn at the multisyllabic levels. That's why I put these words here to show you. These activities can absolutely be for secondary learners. So in the general education class, the tier 1, even 2, I would recommend different program materials for teachers who wanted recommendations. This MegaWords is certainly something that can be utilized in a general education classroom. Some of the teachers I worked with in Siskiyou County and Riverside are using this, and Napa too, I believe, in their general education classrooms, where they're learning different syllable types and division rules with the whole class, and it also supports vocabulary development. These resources here, vocabulary from classical roots. This is a wonderful way to teach morphology. Again, can be taught whole class in the general education classroom. Just need to find time in your day, and it can look different for different schools. It can be Wednesdays we do this, in our class, or it could be 5-10 minutes every, warm-up activities. And then, of course, there's a Logic of English, which is a very fun, amazing resource that Chrissy introduced me to. Okay, this is what that this vocabulary from classical roots looks like. This is 4th, 5th, 6th grade. A is 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th grade. So this goes all the way through high school. This is some of the, I believe this is the A level, and it teaches the root spect. I don't think this is the high school level, actually. It might be the middle school. It teaches the root spect, and then it teaches prefixes and suffixes, and then they're given vocabulary words. But what they learn is these are not random words that are just tied together in a vocabulary book. It teaches them the prefixes, suffixes, and roots so that they can extend that learning throughout their day and across interdisciplinary. What we didn't touch on that much is that the emotionally sound component of curricula for and teaching for secondary students, but it is so essential to always keep that at front of mind, that again, to utilize resources that are age appropriate, to get buy-in from the students, relationships first. When students are in middle school and high school and have struggled for so long, it's so important to develop a relationship and safety for them in order to be able to teach them in a classroom. So appreciate all of you being educators out there and having relationships with your students and knowing this and finding the resources to help support them. So I just wanted to end on that.
Thank you so much, Jody. And we've got several really, I think, important questions that our audience that have joined us this evening that they have asked that we address. So we're going to take a few minutes here and going to back up a little bit. Chrissy, as you were presenting, a question came in about in the recent project for adolescent literacy survey, the cause of reading struggle was identified. The second most popular answer pointed at families as the cause, that parents didn't read to their kids enough. How do we address some of this bias in the why of our professional development? Do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we were doing our professional learning and starting to have some of these conversations, we had to take a step back and talk about what's in the locus of our control. And we can't, as educators, right, we can't control what's happening at home and some of those challenges for our students. So I think it's one of our biggest struggles with Lead to Literacy has been the the family and community engagement piece, because I feel like sometimes it's harder to connect with families at a secondary level to give them some of this knowledge and information. And so we're, still trying to find ways to connect with families so we can share this information. But I think the big thing is continuing to have the conversations, and when it comes up, be able to share with families, what we know about reading and how the reading brain is developed.
Thank you so much. There might be some follow-up to that. Another question that came in as you were presenting, when you were talking about the program that you have created here, how far behind on reading of development did your program target?
So we had schools, grades 6 through 12, but we had students, one of our favorite stories to tell is he was a fifth year senior. He was 18 at our Corton Community School. Um, he was learning his vowel sounds, and but he was showing up every day to meet with his structured literacy teacher. And so we were finding students that had very large gaps in their understanding and some of their skills. Um, but I think what kept the work going and the wins for us was those students chose to be and come into that classroom every day. And we really talked about they know how important it is and to learn to read, and they want some of those skills. Um, and so we had to adjust the instruction because it was a different setting, that it was more one-on-one, so that students didn't feel the peer pressure or embarrassed by their peers. But there was very large gaps that we were seeing in our learners. And I know Jody worked with one of our schools and went down, oh, sorry, was working with one of our schools, and even the teachers were surprised by the data and how the gaps in some of the students' skills.
Thank you. Thanks so much. We've got a couple, some other really good questions coming in. I'm going to ask just two questions here for Jody. We're going to move on to another segment, and then we'll have more time at the end to talk to everybody that's joined us this evening. So Jody had a question here that came in while you were presenting, saying, I've been asked by many educators and administrators, how do they balance master schedules and core curriculum with new strategies and supports? Does the Reading League provide models that might help schools, districts answer this question? Do you have any insight into that? Because I know you were going over your diagram where you were talking about groups, et cetera. Is there any more information we can provide the audience with that? And Kristen, feel free to jump in here as well.
Yeah, so yeah, that's education, right? There's always new initiatives, new trainings, and it's just a matter of really the first day of our training anyway, we really talk about the why, and to get the buy-in. I think that teachers really do believe and see that this is a need, and so then it's really them coming to us and saying, what can we do, and then saying, what are you able to do? And that's what I think it really is individual in that we say, giving ownership to the teachers as well. They'll say, okay, well, yeah, I can do that as a 10-minute warm up, or yeah, I can do that on Wednesdays, and then provide some resources for them that they think that would work for their students. So again, it is going to, it can be an additional resource, but then it can also be things like, how can you teach vocabulary better? So, okay, maybe it's even, I've worked with science teachers. So when you introduce new vocabulary, here are some models and frameworks that you can incorporate into your instruction already to support the students understanding those vocabulary words better. So can we break it down into morphemes? And here are some structures and supports and organizers. And it's providing those tools so they feel that it's just an additional resource instead of like another program. So that's a kind of a quick answer.
Okay. Kristen, anything to add to that?
Yeah, California is a chapter of the Reading League. So at the Reading League national level, they have several tiers of support. They have consulting services, professional development services that address sort of the nuts and bolts of what a district or school might implement. And then when we get to the end of the session, I'll share with you their website resources, the Reading League Compass, that provides you with some support for adolescent literacy and curriculum evaluation tools. Great question.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. And I'm going to keep things moving for us here. We had a couple other questions that have been asked that we didn't get to yet. I've been trying to keep track of those items for us. We had a change in our presentation roster this evening. One of our presenters, Paul Black, was unexpectedly unable to attend. So I've taken the content that he was originally going to cover and I've condensed it a little bit. And we've already had a little conversation between the panel here about how it might be of great benefit to have another session that's going to be focusing more on what Paul was planning on presenting because he has a deep background as a school psychologist. As I mentioned earlier, my background is as a special education ELA instructor. I've been doing case management. I also have a background in psychology with a master's in clinical psych from Pepperdine, and I worked at a psychiatric facility for 2 years just outside of Washington, D.C., and I was working with teens and adolescents who were previously diagnosed with a psychiatric condition, but they also had IEPs. And so it was very grueling work. It was challenging work. It was beautiful work. I met some of the most amazing students and staff that I've ever had the pleasure to work with. So I've got somewhat of a background in this area, and I felt comfortable enough to explore some of the topics Paul was planning on covering. I'm not going to be able to go as deep into the content as he was planning on going. So I just want to take a second and let me reset my time so I make sure that we are making a point to have enough in the back end so we can answer all of your questions. And so I'm trying to kind of bring everything together for us right now. Some of the recent questions in the chat are about motivation. What does this look like? And so I really want to lean into the motivation component of doing this work with our secondary students. It is critical because as they are going through the school years, as they are moving through grade levels, and perhaps not making those skill gains, they begin to lose a sense of motivation. They begin to see our classrooms as a place where they do not belong. And if we zoom out for just a second from the special education lens we've been talking about quite a bit this evening, in general, when we are talking about students being able to perform grade level reading, we know that students going into the fourth grade, 64% of those students are not performing at grade level, and this is across the country. And of that 64% of students, 75% never catch up. So it's not just an issue of special education. We have students in our tier 1 classrooms that are not identified, that have created compensating strategies that they are using. Maybe those compensating strategies are lending toward avoidance. If you've worked in the high school setting, you know attendance can become a huge issue, and you'll talk to these students and they're great, and you just wonder, why can't I get them to come to school? Why can't they be here in the room with me? And we'll talk a little bit about that here in the next few minutes. And Chrissy mentioned earlier the simple view of reading. This is one of my favorite go-to models when I'm thinking about the work that I'm doing with students, when I'm working with teachers and talking about how you can really apply effective instruction in your classroom. We're looking at our students' skills in order of, can they read and can they navigate text and demonstrate mastery of the text? So can they read a short paragraph? Can they select an appropriate multiple choice response accurately? And I've worked with so many parents and teachers where they just want to focus on how can they do this end element better? Like, how do we get our students to perform at a higher level when it comes to demonstrating mastery of text? The problem is, if our students don't have the decoding skills to read the text, there is nothing that we can do to teach them that's going to get them to answer questions correctly. So if you can't read the words on the page, it doesn't matter if you've got really great oral language skills, which if you've worked in secondary struggling reader classrooms, you probably did what I did, which was turn your classroom into an oral language classroom where you're reading with your students, you're reading for your students so they can access this content. But if they can't decode the words on the page, it doesn't matter that they have these higher level language comprehension skills, because 0 times 1 is always going to be 0. So I think this is really valuable to keep front of mind as you're working with struggling readers, when you're asking yourself, well, why would I do this work with phonemes and morphology and multisyllabic words and all of these things? If we can't get our students decoding the words on the page, we're stuck in the mud with them. And there can be so many issues that can impact a student's ability to effectively engage with text and demonstrate mastery of text, even if you're able to read it out loud or they've got access to audiobooks and things like that. They have opportunities to demonstrate it. We can get them into some of those state standards and connect them to some of the higher level concepts that we're working on in the classroom space. But really, we want to make sure they have the reading skills to be independent. And across the United States, when we look at who are our students in special education classrooms and what are the paramount needs of those students, we see that statistically 50% of all the students in our special education classrooms have qualified under SLD. And of that group, 85% of them have a primary disability in reading and language processing. So this really is the area where we see roughly 50% of all of our special education students needing support from us. And I think one of the roadblocks we run into as well-meaning educators is that we just don't have the background and the training to address this. So again, thank you for being here tonight, because this is a step in the direction of solving what I consider to be one of our most solvable problems that we've got. We can take care of this in the world of complex problems that we're dealing with. Literacy is something we should be able to tackle and support our students with if we've got the training and we've got the resources. A couple more thoughts on dyslexia from my own background in the classroom is we refer to dyslexia as a hidden disability. And I think that as you are watching other educators and maybe even being very conscientious about how you yourself are interacting with some of our struggling readers, there can be a lot of frustration on the part of the adult when working with these students. And part of that comes from, as Jody was pointing out earlier, some of these students are just incredibly bright. In fact, one of the features of a dyslexia diagnosis is this discrepancy in their language comprehension skills. So their oral language skills and then their reading skills. It's this unexpected gap between these two areas. So when you meet these students, when you interact with these students, very often they are funny, they're fun, they have friends, they're on sports teams. And you might think, why is this student in my class? Why is this student struggling? And then you hear the student reading out loud and you go, oh, okay, I'm starting to get it now. We've really got a lot of work to do here, but how do I do it? So it's just really important when you're working with these students that you're keeping in mind, this is not a matter of they don't want to do well. This is not a matter of not trying. It's not that they just don't care. All of these labels and all of these things that we can sometimes unintentionally project onto our students, these students often suffer in silence for years in our classrooms. We know, again, 1 in 5 individuals has features of dyslexia. While 20% of all students in our schools aren't qualifying for IEP services under SLD, we know we're missing students out there. So just keep your eyes open. And because we miss these students, there is a lot that goes on with them emotionally and psychologically. There's a great graphic. I don't have it in my presentation this evening, but the dyslexia iceberg. So much of what's going on with our students is actually below the surface of the water, and we can't see it. So we need to keep these things in mind, because there really is a significant impact on mental health when we're talking about people that struggle with literacy. And as we are missing our students because maybe they're compensating, maybe they are trying to just memorize these sight words and these words that are very short, single syllable words that they're exposed to in the lower elementary school grades. But as they're moving through the grade levels, that strategy is no longer working for them, and they are struggling. We're not addressing it. And that really equates to consistent trauma that the student is being asked to interact and deal with on a day-to-day basis. So, they're over and over again being put in a situation where they're having extreme anxiety, extreme stress that they're experiencing in our classrooms. And so often we will see students that struggle with literacy engaging in the flight or fight response. And so, they are presented with a stimulus. They're presented with a situation. Perhaps it's the time of the class where we're going to be doing popcorn reading, or, we know we're going to be engaging in literacy. And so this is where all of a sudden their brains are going to be triggered, and they are going to be receiving messages from their brains in order to protect themselves of either get out of there or get ready to fight, because this is an unbelievably stressful situation for them to be in. And so we know that this fight or flight response really, on a consistent, experienced basis, leads to long-term implications and long-term rewiring of neural centers in the brain. And so this is, again, one of the reasons why we can see some of these behaviors that are so consistent with students that struggle with reading. And I don't know about you, but this was the classic cycle I would see from so many of my students. I would present my students with a task of some sort. The student would then begin engaging in some sort of problematic behavior. Oftentimes it was a student getting up out of the chair, right? Here we go. We're getting up out of the chair. I'm going to wander in the room. I'm going to wander over here. Maybe I'm going to go stand behind Miss Kammer's desk or get close to it. I know she doesn't like that. Now she's got to address me. So now I'm addressing that issue, trying to figure out what's going on. Oftentimes things might escalate. And what happens in the end of the day is the student has escaped the academic task. And as a result of the student escaping the task, the student's skills do not improve. And when you've got somebody that's really good at this, and some of our students are so good at this cycle, sometimes pulling us into conflict cycles. But when you think about how they are doing this as a function of removing this fight or flight stimulus, alleviating this overwhelming stress and anxiety that they're feeling, it can make sense, and you can begin to address the situation. This is some of the ways that fight or flight or freeze response might manifest in the classroom. Sometimes students, that they'll just say to you, I'm so tired. I don't know why I'm so tired. Well, they're overwhelmed cognitively. Their brains are shutting down on them. It might also be, again, walking out of the room. Who's had the student that said they needed to go to the bathroom and they were gone for 25, 30 minutes, right? Raise your hand, everybody. Gets to the point where it's like, now it's like, okay, I'm talking to the paraeducator. We got to keep track of this. What's going on? But they're avoiding your classroom because they don't have the skills to engage in the material that you're asking them to engage with, and they're avoiding the situation, right? They're protecting themselves. And so we know that for so many of our students that struggle with these reading skills, motivation ultimately suffers because day in, day out, they are just receiving the message, this is not the place for you. We're not going to give you what you need. We're not going to give you the skills and the materials that we know you can handle to be successful, to build you back up. And this is part of the craft of working with struggling readers and going back and really engaging in some triage. The consequences for not doing this, not providing support for our students who are struggling in this area, they are real. We have a lot of shame that our students who struggle with reading experience. And shame is different from guilt. Guilt is a very internalized response. And so a lot of times when we feel guilty, we tend to make positive change. It can be really directed toward a behavior like, I overslept again. I'm going to make sure I set my alarm clock early. Shame's very different. And the response to shame can turn outward. And it can include aggressive behaviors. It can include a really sophisticated negative sense of self that can be very challenging to dismantle once you get into this work. So the earlier you're able to address students who are struggling with reading and start providing them with instruction that is going to give them the skills they need for success, the easier it's going to be to deconstruct all of these negative emotions and barriers that they have created. And so time is always of the essence. We know when we look at the corrections statistics in the United States, 1 in 5 adults we know is going to have low literacy skills, and that translates to about 43 million adults. The United States is leading the developed world in the lowest literacy rates of any other developed country. And again, I believe this is one of our most solvable problems if we just have the training and the resources. We also know that 70% of all of our prison inmates are reading below a basic level. So when we look at the statistics, we know there is a direct correlation between reading level and problems operating and functioning in our communities. And conversely, we know that the negative behaviors, those decrease as reading performance increases. So it behooves us all to do this work. And one of the questions I saw in the chat earlier was, how do we address as upper grade teachers the gaps that we have in our students that we see in terms of their literacy skills? And something I like to say all the time to any educator, I don't care what class you're teaching, what grade level you're teaching, reading is everyone's responsibility. And if we can get on board with that idea, that's how we can really make a change. So when you just demonstrate ownership of this issue, regardless of what grade level you're teaching, being here tonight is one example of how you can demonstrate ownership of this issue. Reading is everyone's responsibility. If we are allowing students to leave our school settings and they don't have this most fundamental and critical set of skills, what are we setting them up for? How are we really preparing them for success, for the future, for skills, for jobs, you name it? Everything comes back to what does our reading skill look like, and how do we get this into our classrooms and really enhance the work that we need to do in this space. So step one is you're here tonight. Thank you so much for that. If you're in the classroom and you're working with students that you know are struggling readers, there are strategies that you can incorporate into the classroom. And I have done this myself, and I'm going to tell you, I have always been so pleasantly surprised at the students who are willing to engage in some of these coping mechanisms when you introduce them into the classroom space. Students will engage in intentional breathing, taking a drink of water, taking a stroll, going out, moving around a little bit, asking students, doing the five senses exercise. Tell me, what do you hear? What do you see? What do you smell? What do you feel? Right? Like putting them in a different space. Body scanning, starting at the toes, coming all the way up. We can reset what is happening for them emotionally in so many discrete, easy to navigate ways. We also know that it is relationships, relationships, relationships when we're working with our struggling readers, for any student really, but particularly with our struggling readers. So get to know them, know what's going on in their lives. And I'm not saying you need to be their therapist. I'm just saying that if they know that you care, it is going to make a huge difference in their ability to persevere through challenging tasks and create that trust that they need to have with you to engage in this work, because they've decided they can't do it. So again, we've got to reset and dismantle all of these preconceived ideas and stories, personal narratives that they tell themselves all the time. I always like to ask students if they have pets. Just thinking about your pet, right, sometimes can release all of the dopamine you need in your brain to have a good solid reset. Invite them to bring a picture of their pet, leave it in the classroom with you, right? Ask them how you can create words or phrases that are going to help them. I again will say, like, what's your pet's name? If I say your pet's name, is that a cue that maybe you need to take a break, or is that a cue I'm asking you if you're okay? You could give me a thumbs up, a thumb sideways, a thumbs down. And that's in a larger group where you're just, again, trying to create safe spaces for our students. Ultimately, when we're working in this literacy space, our whole goal is to increase our students' sense of self-efficacy while reducing the perceived difficulty of the task that we're asking them to complete. So that's where our programming materials come in. We want to make sure that we have taught a skill, and then afterwards, as we're moving the students into independent work, as we're engaged in that gradual release of responsibility teaching model, that what we're asking them to do is work that they have now received the skills that they can handle. And that alone can really help to rebuild that student's sense of accomplishment and motivation in the literacy space. Also, you modeling growth mindsets for the students. I know at the beginning of the year, I would say to my students, I'm going to mess up a bunch this year, right? And it's going to be your job to just give me some space and some grace when that happens. You're going to mess up too, and I'm going to do the same for you. And so, the mutual respect and the modeling of this growth mindset is really powerful. And being able to harness the power of the word yet when our students are struggling and they are becoming frustrated, because again, this is not easy. It is going to take work. It's going to take repetitions, especially with our students that have more pronounced dyslexic features. They're going to need to do things multiple times, and they might become frustrated. And, I didn't get it. I'm not getting it. And then you can create this powerful pathway to success for those students by saying, yeah, you didn't get it, but you just didn't get it yet. And there is nothing, in my opinion, more meaningful for a student and getting into that engagement model of work and, moving toward a common goal where the student is challenging themselves and they are working with the materials and really facing some of these skills and these situations that have been so challenging for them and difficult. Your enthusiasm for the work that you're doing in the classroom is so contagious. If you do not appreciate what you're teaching and how you're teaching and your materials, all of that is going to be translated over to the student that you're working with. And they want to be on our side, even the ones that, seems like they don't like us all that much. They do want to be on our side. And so if you love what you're doing, you are inviting opportunities for success to your students. We're wrapping up here, and I'm just going to real quickly give shout out a couple books if you are interested in learning more. I highly recommend Anita Archer, the Explicit Instruction book. Have a copy of this on my shelf. Amazing. If you want to dive more into the dyslexia resources and understanding more about what that looks like, these are three heavy, excellent resources to have in your classroom, at home. And Overcoming Dyslexia just came out with the second edition, I want to say in 2020. And this is by Sally Shaywitz. And she actually has a free course right now through Yale University that's on Coursera.org. You can take it for free. It's asynchronous. If you want to pay, I think it's $40 or $50, you can get a certificate that says that you've completed it. I went through it. It's amazing. It takes you through the basics of dyslexia. It's really going to be empowering for all of you teachers that are working in this space and with these students. Okay, so let me stop and let's open this up and see what questions we might have.
Thank you, Jody. That was amazing. There was a lot of activity in the chat for that segment. I think that emotional piece and really resonates with educators, and especially educators who are connected with the older students. They just resonated with everything you said. There were a couple of questions about providing some examples of student motivation or behavior supports to engage some of those reluctant secondary students. I think you mentioned a few, but what do
I
you
would say that I would say one of the most critical things is to make sure that you're giving them wins in the
Mm.
classroom. So, there's nothing that's going to be more powerful than the student actually feeling successful. And our students are very smart and they know when they have done something of value. Your job is to make sure that you are providing them with the skills and the practice opportunities, and that can be guided practice, right? Side by side with them. And then you're gradually releasing them into independent work. And then, activating prior knowledge the next time you're working with that student by asking them to do something, have them show you that they remember what you did in the previous lesson instead of you taking them through it yourself, which is something I would do quite often, because I would say, does everybody remember what we did yesterday? And they go, yeah, Miss Kammer. And I'd get into it. They had no idea. So instead of me just, taking their word for it or me saying it, have them show you and get them going, get them engaged. Chrissy, anything you'd like to add to that?
I was just going to add, a lot of our schools had celebrations. Like after the first trimester, they had a party, and all the kids were recognized for their progress or growth, and so it really became a celebration. And the kids feed off of that energy. Um, and to, like a lot of you were in the comments and what you mentioned around relationships. I also feel like with our older kids, we just have to be honest with them and say, your needs haven't been met yet. And so we're going to work together. We're going to do this and we can, and one of our teachers, she even took some of the slides from Chartwell, and we worked together to adapt them for her kids. So she shared the like, this is how the brain reads, this is the process with the kids, so that it wasn't this mystery of like, how do we learn to read. So I really think being honest with kids, building those relationships, but then also like celebrating all those wins, like you were saying, is a huge thing. And we have to celebrate our wins too, right? Like, I don't think we give ourselves kudos enough for when our kids are making progress and growth. So
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think normalizing some of the challenges, like students don't know that are struggling readers that 20% of people struggle with reading. They don't know that, right? So providing that type of information, especially for our older learners, it just normalizes their experience. And again, keeping an eye on those levels of depression and anxiety. So many students will really benefit from having counseling available to them and having a safe place and somebody that they can go speak to. Again, I think more often than not, just in an attempt to feel normal about what they're experiencing in our classrooms.
Love it. Love it. You guys have been a stellar audience. You have hung in there for one of our longest sessions. I can tell this topic means a lot to you. We will definitely reschedule with Mr. Black so we can get his point of view and perspective and presentation. I also saw a great suggestion to bring some kids in, to older students, to secondary students, to talk about their experiences. So we'll look into that as well. I will link this slide deck from the Reading League California so you have the links for some of the resources for adolescent literacy that were mentioned tonight. The Reading League Compass is a great website. It has information on adolescent literacy and reading intervention evaluation guides for adolescents. As a chapter in California, we have a chapter meeting on January 15th. If you join the Reading League California, you'll get these emails and this information. You can also follow our Facebook page and see everything posted there as well. In February, we have an event with Carrie Curto from the Reading League National, who will be talking about the Reading League's new curriculum guide that they just published also on the Compass. So we've got some good things coming up in January and February. But until then, we want you all to have an excellent holiday. Thank you to our panel. This topic was multi, so we'll be back. We will have you back. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We appreciate your time and your expertise. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful holiday and Happy New Year.
Thank you, educators, so much.
We appreciate you.